What if one of the scariest haunted house stories was actually based on a true story? What if the scares were real? Well, today we're gonna find out as we explore whether or not room 1408 was inspired by a real haunted hotel room. So let's get into it. The inspiration for John Tucker's novella and Mike Flanagan's miniseries came from a source that many horror fans are familiar with. The infamous Cecil Hotel, also known as the Stay on the Ladder due to its last name. The Cecil Hotel is located in downtown Los Angeles and opened in 1927. It had initially been marketed as an elite hotel with a rooftop restaurant and an Olympic-sized swimming pool. But soon the Cecil would open their doors to those who weren't quite so wealthy. After the Second World War, it became popular for those who were less fortunate to stay at the hotel, which over time earned the Cecil a reputation for being a flophouse. And as anyone who has ever watched the series knows, when there are a lot of people who don't have a lot of money, things can get pretty dicey. Now I could go into more detail about the history of the Cecil, but I highly recommend watching the Netflix series American Horror Story Hotel if you haven't already, because they do a fantastic job covering the hotel's history and the various stigmas that have come along with it. This is important to mention because throughout its history, the Cecil Hotel has been linked to multiple deaths, including several well-known serial killers. Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, stayed here in 1985, and also in the mid-80s, Jeffrey Dahmer called the Cecil home for 2 years while he worked as a security guard in the hotel's basement. With all these serial killers hanging around, it's no wonder that the Cecil has acquired this kind of reputation. But with that said, the reason why we're talking about it today is because of what many people believe to be the most infamous death that occurred within its walls. The death of Eliza Lamb. In July of 2013, 21-year-old Eliza Lamb arrived at the Cecil Hotel. She had been traveling from Vancouver to Los Angeles and had been staying at various locations along the way. According to her diary, she had been experiencing symptoms of bipolar disorder since June. Just a few days after arriving in, a layman checked into the Cecil, allegedly paying for 5 nights, but 3 days later, she was nowhere to be found. In the 3 days leading up to her disappearance, strange things had been happening around the Cecil. Guests had reported a lack of water pressure, elevator malfunctions, and slow dripping noises coming from the ceiling of the elevator. On July, Lamb was caught on elevator surveillance footage getting into the elevator alone. The video shows her acting strangely as she presses the up button several times before riding the elevator to the top floor, exiting the elevator and walking down the hallway. What makes this video strange is that Lamb appears to be engaging in a conversation. Although the audio had been turned off for privacy reasons, her body language clearly suggests that she is responding to someone else. When she reaches the end of the hall, the camera switches to a different angle, and we see her enter room 1408. At this point, the video cuts out. As the days went on without Eliza, her family and friends grew increasingly worried. They tried calling the police, but as she was an undocumented immigrant, they were hesitant to get involved. Eventually, however, her family won them over, and a search of her room was conducted on July. It revealed nothing out of the ordinary except for her diary. Her whereabouts remained a mystery until nearly 2 weeks later, when a maid entered room 3327 to clean it. The woman noticed a foul odor coming from the room next door, 3328, and reported it to the night manager. When the manager knocked on the door to inform the guest about the smell, they got no response. So the manager entered the room and found Eliza's lifeless body inside the water tank of the elevator. With her death being ruled accidental drowning, the coroner suggested that she may have climbed into the water tank for some unknown reason, perhaps under the influence of whatever medications she had been taking. However, the circumstances surrounding her death were extremely suspicious. The first thing was the surveillance footage showing her entering room 1408 and then never leaving. As the police investigated this further, they discovered that the key card used to enter the room hadn't been used since Lamb's death. No one had been in that room for the past 3 weeks. Now, given that there were signs of water damage in her room, it seemed plausible that she could have accidentally drowned. The problem, though, is that her keycard was never deactivated, meaning that she should have been seen leaving the room at some point. Not only that, but investigators learned that during the early morning hours of July, multiple guests had complained about strange sounds coming from behind the wall of Lamb's room, one witness even claiming to hear what sounded like screams. While there will never be any definite answer as to what happened in that room, it's safe to say that whatever it wasn't a good time. That's because once her body was recovered, the engineers were called in to take a look at the elevator. And what they found was both terrifying and completely impossible. You see, in order to get into the elevator shaft, Lamb would have had to remove the access panel, which is locked with a 200-pound pull force. This means that a child would need the equivalent of almost their entire body weight to open the door. And as if that wasn't enough, there are also metal bars on the inside that prevent anyone from opening the door from the other side. Even if Lamb somehow managed to get past the first door, she wouldn't have been able to open the second one. So how did she get into the elevator shaft? The truth is, we don't know. There are many theories, but none make much sense. Some have claimed that the door must have been left unlocked, but this is extremely unlikely as the staff knew that the room was occupied. Others suggest that the door was propped open with a makeshift tool. But considering that there were no signs of forced entry and the door wouldn't have stayed open without the power running through the lock, this theory doesn't hold up either. The most popular theory is that Eliza was pushed into the shaft, but this isn't very likely either. The last person who was seen on camera with her got off the elevator on the 14th floor, and there would have been no way for them to reach the shaft without going back down and waiting for another elevator. Whatever the case may be, there is no denying that her death was extremely mysterious, and likely would have been even more mysterious had it not been for the show, us creators using it as inspiration for their work. Because while we may never know what happened to Lamb, we do know that her story definitely played a role in creating Room 1408. If you've made it this far, I thank you for watching and ask that you please subscribe to the channel if you have yet to do so. You can check out my podcast by clicking the link in the description below. It would mean a lot to me if you gave my podcast a listen. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you back again soon for another video.